So today we'll continue with the review and I'll prepare you for the midterm on Wednesday. Okay? So this is where we left off last time. Last time we studied the review sheet, right? And we finished up on the last question, transitivity, right? And we looked at some news headlines, right? That represent the bombing of the Chinese embassy, right? In Kosovo. And we look at the headlines from the China Daily, for example, right? And so where did we leave off? We were here, right? Maybe around here. Nations condemn bombing of embassy, right? So we try to analyze the transitivity patterns. So we have nations condemn bombing of embassy, right? Nations, we have this, and then condemn has to do with the saying. So it's a verbal process, right? So we have the sayer and the verbal process, right? And then what else do we have? China, Russia condemn raid. Raid is the attack, right? So we have, again, we have the verbal process and we have the sayers being China and Russia, okay? Next one, official thanks Yugoslavs for assistance. Again, it's a saying process, so it's a verbal process. We have official as the sayer and thanks as the verb, right? The verbal process. What else do we have? 1,000 demonstrate throughout the world. We have, in this case, a material process, right? With thousands being the actor, and then demonstrate is the material process, okay? And throughout the world, that's your circumstance and so on, right? Next one, Jian slamming act of aggression. So this is supposed to be maybe one of the Chinese officials, right? So we have this, and then we have slam as the verb, and then act of aggression, right? In this case, it's a process of saying, so it's a verbal process. And Jiang is the sayer, okay? So sayer and verbal, okay? Next one, Li, again, presumably one of the Chinese officials. Li calls for vigilance. Vigilance is like careful watching, right? So again, verbal process, we have Li as the sayer, and then call for is the verbal process, okay? Next, nation mourns 3 martyrs. Nation, like the whole nation in this case is China, right? Mourns, and then 3 martyrs. In this case, we can say that it's a behavioral process. We have nation as the behavior, and then mourns being the behavioral process, okay? Next, world continues condemning raids. Words like throughout the world, right? Different nations. Continues condemning raids. So we have condemn as a verb. Condemn here, again, the process of saying. So it's a verbal process and world being the sayer, okay? Diplomat refuses U.S. excuse for bombing. So we have diplomat being the sayer and refuses as the verbal process, okay? Because it has to do with saying, right? Or speaking, so it's a verbal process. Next one, leaders reiterate stand on bombing. Reiterate is to say it again, right? Re is again, iterate is to repeat. So leaders being the sayer, reiterate is the verbal process, okay? Next, we have Clinton phones to apologize, pledges inquiry. So Clinton here phones. Phones in this case is the material process, and Clinton is the censor. The actor. Okay, so actor and then material. Pledges in that also material process. Okay. Lavrov says China must get justice from UN Council. Says clearly a verbal process, and Lavrov there is the sayer. Okay. Next one, Robinson views raid as serious. View is in this case is to think, right? So it's a mental process, and Robinson is the sensor. Okay, sensor and mental. Next one, nation calls for thorough investigation into attack. Nation, in this case, like the whole nation, China. So we have calls for, again, is a verbal process, and nation is a sayer. Next one, U.S. trying to divert attention from bombing, trying to divert attention to do something, right? The process of doing is the material process, divert is the material process, and U.S. is the actor. Okay. Next one, audience moved by deeds from embassy. We have moved by deeds. So moved, like I feel something, right? So I'm moved by your words, for example. To be moved is to feel it, right? So in this case, it's mental process, and audience is the sensor, right? And finally, books on NATO rate sell fast. We have the process of the material process here because it's about what happens, right? So we have books as the actor, and then sell fast as the material process. Okay. So again, when you do transitivity analysis, it has to do with the meaning, right? So it has to do with the meaning, not necessarily the like the meaning on context, not necessarily the word itself. Let's see. For example, audience moved by deeds. Moved there means to feel, right? So in this case, it's the mental process. Okay. Now, what kind of comment can we say from our analysis here? We don't just do analysis for analysis' sake, right? So there must be some kind of interpretation. So from the first one to the last one, what do you think is the process that the writer uses most frequently? What is the most frequently used process that you see? We have the verbal process, right? That's for sure, right? And who might be the sayer of the verbal process? Who are the sayers there? In number one, let me scroll this up. In number one, the first one, US-led NATO raid is condemned. We don't have the sayer, right? We don't have the sayer. This is the verbal process, but the sayer is there. Someone must have condemned the US-led NATO, right? So this is like the goal and so on. But we don't have that. What else? We have nations condemn. For example, nations condemn. Now the sayer is nations, right? So we have that, and then we have China and Russia, also the sayer. And then we have official thanks, right? So we have the sayer there. And then Jiang Salam, right? So we have that Chinese person. Li calls for vigilance, so we have that person, and so on, right? World continues condemning rate, we have world, right? So most of the time, what do we have as the sayers? We have either Chinese people, including Jiang and Li, right? And the nation, right? The whole nation, and so on, right? And also, we have other nations, including Russia, including nations, other nations. So the most frequently used process is the verbal process, and the sayers include China and Russia and other nations, and also Chinese people, right? So in this way, we can say that your interpretation might be that China and Chinese participants are represented as playing an active role in saying something, right? And saying something regarding the consequences of the bombing, right? And China and Chinese participants are foregrounded, right? Are foregrounded as the subject in most cases in the verbal processes that you see. And the writer also align, the word is align. The writer also align, meaning to put on the same level. The writers of the headline also align other nations, including Russia, including like nations in the plural form, right? Align these international communities with China, right? And so the position is the same, and the writers want to say that, well, the international communities do not agree with what the US did, and so on. Okay? What about the rest? So you see the verbal process as the most frequently used. What about the rest? We have US-led NATO, right, which is not Chinese or China or other nations. We have US-led NATO. We have, what else? Clinton, right? We have Clinton here, right? And we have, let me scroll down. We have US, where's that? US trying to divert attention. We have that, right? So at least if it's something that has to do with the US or America, when they are foregrounded, okay? When they are foregrounded, meaning when they are the subject, right? They are in the material process or they are in the verbal process, but the writers depict them as being acted upon, right? US-led NATO, the first one read, is condemned, right? So they are downplaying, the writers are downplaying the roles of the US and then anything that's related to America. US-led NATO raid is condemned, or Clinton phones to apologize. He does something, but he does something in order to apologize. So he shows his regret. And US trying to divert attention. So again, the role of US or the power is downplayed or is undermined. US trying to divert attention to get the attention away from what should be the focus, right? So they are depicted negatively. US or US-related people are depicted negatively, or they are pacifized, downplaying the role and undermining their roles. Okay? So that's what we get from the transitivity analysis. Okay, over the weekend, I got some questions from you guys about nominalization, so I want to emphasize that. I want to focus on that one more time. Okay, so again, nominalization is a noun phrase, right, which has a corresponding clause, right? So when you get a nominalized maybe phrase, you change it from the original clause. So from clause to a noun phrase, okay? And the head of the noun phrase is related to the verb, right? Originally a verb or an adjective. So, when we talk about nominalization, we talked about that in the context of what's congruent and what's not congruent, right? So typically when we try to represent what we think, when we try to say what is going on in our head or what's happening in the real world, we usually have the participants and we realize we create them in the form of noun phrases, right? So like people, like US, like America, and so on, right? We usually use noun phrases like people in the room, what's on the table, and so on. They usually are in the form of noun phrases. And then the processes are like verb phrases, right? So what's happening, who is saying something, who is thinking, and so on, right? And other details like circumstances, extra information like reason, time, and manner would be in the prepositional phrases or adverb phrases, right? And we can modify noun phrases using adjectives like size, quality, and so on, okay? That's what's congruent. But when you change from the congruent form to incongruent form, you do something to the processes here. You do something to the verb phrases here so that the verb phrases might become noun phrases, and in doing that, they'll become participants of the whole clause, the new clause. So there are many ways to do it. So, so I said there are some, I can classify nominalization into so many types. Like the first one, taking a process as a thing. So in this case, you change the verb into a noun, right? If you look at the examples there, the police investigated the matter is changed into the police conducted an investigation into the matter. Now, if you compare the two versions, the first version, the congruent form, we have the police as a participant is the noun phrase, so that's normal, right? And investigate is the verb, that's normal, and then the matter is the goal, which is normal, a noun phrase again. But you can do another version of it by using the more incongruent form. So you have the police conducted an investigation into the matter. So here you might say that, well, the process is the same. It's the material process to conduct something, right? Is to do something. So it's still the material process. But the sense is different, though. Like conduct has been added, right? Conduct, which doesn't really mean anything. Conduct is like to do, right? So like I did my homework and so on, right? I did my teaching instead of I teach and so on, right? And here investigate is changed into investigation, right? And the original, the noun phrase matter, which is the goal, or which is the noun phrase complement or object of investigate, is changed into the complement of the noun investigation, right? So you see that you have a long noun phrase, and investigation, that's the head noun, and into the matter, that's the complement of the investigation, right? So it makes the noun longer, right? In the second one is the same. The floods considerably eroded the land, right? And you change it into there was considerable erosion of the land from the floods. So in this case, the process is changed from material to existential, right? There was, that's the existential, right? And you collapse so many things together. What was originally the adverb considerably becomes the adjective considerable, right? Modifying erosion, erode becomes erosion, and the land, which is the object of erode, becomes the prepositional phrase of the land, right? And the flood, which is the original participant, right? The actor in the original clause becomes like maybe an adjunct or a modifier from the flood. And you can see that you pack so many things in just one noun phrase, which is considerable erosion of the land from the floods, which used to be a clause. So this is what we call normalization, okay? And when you do normalization, as you can see, the agent is gone into like from the flood being an adjunct and so on, okay? So it increases the information load and it makes it more confusing, the normalized version, okay? Number two, classification number two, you can take quality as thing. Like in this case, you make not the verb into a noun, but adjective phrases into a noun. They were narrow-minded and I don't like it. So you change narrow-minded here into a noun. So you have their narrow-mindedness caused me not to like them, right? So in this case, you change from the description to a noun phrase, then narrow-mindedness. And in this case, the narrow-mindedness acts as an agent that could cause, that could do something. So the process has been changed totally, right? From the relational process to material process, right? Or in the second example, they ceased to be hostile because they lost personnel. So you change it to be hostile, that's the quality adjective, right? You change it to a noun form, hostility ceased due to the loss of personnel. So this is like as if it just happened. Hostility could cease itself, but in fact it could not, right? So you can see that when you change the form, the meaning also changes, okay? The last one, taking assessment as thing. If you look at number three, you can go now. For example, in this case, you focus on the modal verb can, right? So you change it to my permission grants your leaving now, right? So just from you can go now is the same as my permission grants your leaving now. So can is changed to permission and so on, because can, in this case, indicates permission, right? Or in the second one, that's what you should do. Should indicates obligation. So you take off the should and you put it in the noun, in the nominal related nominal form, your obligation. requires you to do it. So in these two cases, you can see that you change the original clauses into material processes, okay? Making it even more abstract. Last one, sometimes you could sometimes you could change the circumstances into processes, circumstances being like extra details, like reason or manner or time, and so on. In the first one, you have reason, right? Because he was careless, a traffic accident occurred, right? Now you change careless, because he was careless here, into just a noun form. His carelessness caused a traffic accident, and so on. See that? So because is gone now. Or in the second one, we rushed, and so we became confused. And you change it to our rushing led to confusion, right? So the and so is gone, okay? So again, all in all, what we learned from nominalization is that when you change from a verb or from adjective or from a clause like circumstantial clause into a nominalized form, the meaning is more compact, right? And that means that a lot has been lost along the way, right? In the transformation, okay? And the difficulty might arise after you do normalization, because the relationship between the modifier and the head noun might not be clear. Like important brain changes, like that. So that's a normalized version, right? Change comes from the verb to change, right? So you can say the brain change, important parts of the brain change, and so on. But when you normalize it to become important brain changes, there could be so many meanings associated with that. It could mean there are important changes in the brain, like important hormonal changes, other kinds of change that happen in the brain. So that's one meaning. But it also means there are important changes of the brain. So in this case, the brain itself changes, okay? So just looking at the normalized form, you cannot tell which one should be the meaning of the writer, okay? So in the brain is like the adjunct, but of the brain is like the complement, right? If you do the X bar thing. Or the French onion soup went right down in my stomach, right? Instead of I ate the French onion soup and so on, right? So in that case, the relationship between French and onion and soup is not really clear. It could mean I had soup made from French onions, or I had French soup made from Korean onions, or onion soup made in the French manner. So the relationship between the modifiers and the head noun is never clear when you do the nominalized transformation. So that's what you should think. That's what I want you to think about, and that's why I brought this topic in this class. Okay, and for practice, I have 3 or 4 sentences that I selected from different sources. And can you turn them into more basic forms? Okay, you have on the bottom of that page. 5 sentences. Can you identify the noun, the nominalized forms, and then turn them, unpack them into like more basic forms? And if you don't know who the actor is or who the subject is, just supply like people or someone, okay? And I'll walk around. I'll give you maybe 5 to 7 minutes to work on this, okay? Maybe in the first one here, one of the great fundamental problems you might want to underline, for example, the seemingly inevitable emergence of resistance to drugs or the resistance to chemotherapy by cancer cells, right? So because these are all nominalized forms, we have emergence from emerge, resistant from resist, and also resistant from resist too. So can you unpack them and come up with a more basic form? I'll walk around and help you. Okay, when you guys do the unpacking of nominalized form, maybe first identify the nominalized forms, right? For example, resistance, emergent, and resistant there. So that's the first step. The second step is to find who might be the actor, right? Because when you change these nouns back into verbs, corresponding verbs, when you have a verb, it's in English, it's a must that you must have the subject, right? It's a must. So you have to find the actor, right? And sometimes the actor is in there already. Sometimes if you don't know, you have to supply one, like people or someone. So, for example, in the first one, we have here, inevitable, the seemingly inevitable emergence of resistance to drugs such as antibiotics by bacteria. The actor is already in there, bacteria, right? So you can say, so we have two nouns here, and if you want to change this into a verb, like emerges, so you have to say something emerges, right? And in this case, resistant emerges. But if you do that, then we still haven't unpacked resistant into a verb. So I would change the emerge into some other verbs. Like emerge means to happen or to occur, right? So I can use that. It will inevitably happen. So that's how I change from emergent to just the verb happen. Okay? The reason why I don't use the word emerge is that emerge, the verb emerge, needs some kind of noun in front of it. Okay? So it will inevitably happen that bacteria resist, what is that? Drugs such as antibiotic and the last one, you have the actor in there already, right? Cancer cells resist chemotherapy. So just say chemo, okay? Because again, here, when you change from resistant to resist, you need to have a subject, right? Because in English, a verb cannot go without a subject, right? All sentences except for imperative sentences. So you have to find the subject. But in this case, the subject is already there. But the subject is in the kind of the by or the adjunct thing here. So you have to use that. So we have bacteria resist drugs such as antibiotic, and cancer cells resist chemotherapy. So this thing will eventually happen, and so on. Okay? If you want to be complete, like just say seemingly. For seemingly inevitably. Okay, like that. So that's the first one. This is just only one way to do it. There may be other ways. And if you have a different version, you can ask me to have a look at it after class. Okay? In the second one, let's look at the second one. The second one here, we have the economic crisis of 1997 to 1998 unleashed. So this is like the material process, right? And it's metaphorical because the crisis is made into like a human being that can unleash. Unleash is to release, right? To release the power. So in this case, maybe, and then the noun phrase is here, unprecedented policy changes, right? And another noun phrase is like political changes. So there must be people, there must be someone who changed. Change could be a verb. So you unpack it there, okay? And then the Asian economic crisis, you can make it into like a circumstance clause or phrase, like in the economic crisis of 1997 and so on, okay? So instead of having it as the participant, right? So you can say in or during, you can do that. During the Asian economic crisis in 1997 to 1998, like that. Okay? So instead of having it as the participant, right? So because we say that circumstantial information, such as the time, such as the period of the time, such as the reason, such as the manner, should be in prepositional or should be in adverbial phrases. So instead of being a participant that can do something like that. So during the Asian economic crisis in 1997 to 1998, you can say someone meaning the government, like that, change their policy and political policy in an unprecedented way, like that. So I turn the unprecedented, which is in the adjective form, to a prepositional phrase that indicates manner, right? In what way? In an unprecedented way, meaning in a way that has never been done before. So that's the manner clause, manner phrase. Okay? And this is the time phrase, right? Okay, so far so good. So if it's not clear who did it, just apply some actor, because change needs some actor, right? Someone or something or some government changed the policy and so on. Okay. Next one, proposals have been made for the adoption of critical perspectives on the teaching of literature. So we have three nouns here. Proposal, we have adoption, we have teaching, right? So can you find the actor? So now you could identify the nominalized forms. So now find the actor. So there must be someone who proposed, right? That this thing would happen. And so we can say something like, someone proposed that, right? So someone or teacher, whoever, someone proposed that or people, you can say people proposed that, and then adopt, someone choose adopt, right? That people or someone, whoever, adopt, that's the verb, right? Adopt critical perspective when they teach literature, like that. They meaning people. Or if you don't want to mention the subject like this, you can say, it has been proposed. You can do that. To use the passive voice, right? Or when literature is taught. It doesn't matter which active voice or passive voice you choose, because still you have the verb, right? Even though you're not sure as to who might be the agent and the actor. Okay, so far so good. Next one, North Korea emerges from every statistical comparison that can be made as significantly poorer than the South. So here, the nominalized form is comparison. So from the verb to compare, right? So someone must compare, right? Someone must compare. So you have to supply that in there, right? Someone or people have compared, and then compared, the object is in there, statistics, and as a result, you can say that North Korea is poorer. Is significantly poorer than South Korea and so on. Okay? So far so good. The last one, immobilization. So the fact that someone cannot move, right? Mobile means to move. So im is not. Immobilization, so not moving. And prompt meaning ready or in time, timely. Administration, to give, right? Administration is to give. Of the appropriate antibiotics may lead to resolution. So we have immobilization, we have administration, we have resolution that have to be unpacked, right? So you could do something like, who immobilizes whom? What do you think? And who administers antibiotics to whom? It's the context of medicine, right? So maybe the appropriate actor might be doctors. You can say when doctors, perhaps, right? Likely. When doctor immobilize, who? Immobilize patients. So I have the question mark there. And administer is to give, right? Antibiotics to them, right? Promptly. Promptly meaning like in a timely manner. Promptly, right? We have that. May lead to resolution. Resolution meaning the problem can be solved, right? So you can just say the problem can be solved, or the problem is solved, and so on. Okay, like that. So in this case, I break it down into two clauses, right? We have when and then the main clause, because lead to or may cause, it involves the cause and effect, right? So when you have cause and effect, it might be better to separate it into two clauses and so on, okay? So that's just only one version. You can say if doctors, you can use if doctors immobilize patients and administer antibiotics promptly, then the problem can be solved and so on, okay? And on this handout also, I have a review for transitivity. So you could use this chart on Wednesday to help you. So I wrote down all the processes ranging from or beginning from material to existential, okay? And then there are core meanings that are associated with these processes. Like the material process is a process of doing or happening. So if it has to do with someone doing something or an event happening, you can categorize it as a material process. And material process is like the default category, the biggest process that you will see, okay? And mental has to do with sensing in so many ways, like perceiving, thinking, feeling, and wanting. So if it has to do with one of these, then it's the mental process. Relational, being and having, right? Being with the verb to be and having with the verb to have, for example. And verbal has to do with saying, behavioral has to do with behaving, and existential has to do with existing. Like there is, there are, there exists something, and so on. Okay? And the last column lists all the participants in each process. For the material process, you have the actor, which is a must, right, the subject, and you may have the goal or you may have the beneficiary or not. Okay? So these are optional, and so on. And for the mental process, you have the sensor and you have the phenomenon. The person who senses, and the phenomenon is what he or she senses or what they sense, and so on. Okay? So you have all these participants. So you could use this as a shortcut to help you label all the participants and all the processes. Okay? We have about 10 minutes or so, so let's practice labeling and critiquing or interpreting what the transitivity analysis can do. So let's do number 1 together. So this is a news piece that tells you what happened during maybe an accident that happened to a big boat, okay, a big ship. Okay? So in number 1, shaken passengers told off their terror. So told off, you have told off, right? That's a verb, so it's a process. Told off has to do with saying, so it's a verbal process, right? And shaken passengers, passengers who were shaken, meaning they are frightened, right? So shaken passengers, so they are sensors. I'm sorry, the sayer, right? Sayer, verbal, and told of their terror, right? So the terror is the verbiage, right? The verbiage, that's what is told. After a cross-channel car ferry plowed into a dock yesterday. So we have plowed into a dock yesterday, right? Plowed into a dock yesterday. So in this case, we have the material process plow into because it's what's happening, right? What was happening, so it's the material process. And the car ferry, cross-channel car ferry, like a big ship that transports cars, that's the actor, okay? So actor and material, and then yesterday that's circumstantial, right? Hurling them 12 feet through the air. Hurling, that's the material process. So it's like the accident hurl them, hurl meaning to throw them, them being the goal. 12 feet through the air, that's the circumstantial, okay? Number 2, dozens were stretched off P&O Stena Line's giant 28 ton, that's the name of the ship, as fleets of ambulances queue on the quayside at Calais. Quayside is like, quay is the dock, okay? D-O-C-K, dock, the port. So we have dozens were stretched, dozen like people, right? So this doesn't being the goal, not the actor, okay? Because this is a passive voice, right? We foreground the goal. So dozens, here is the goal, and then were stretchers like stretch, that's the material process of the ship. The ship is the information, circumstantial information. As, so we move on to the second clause, as fleets of ambulances, that's the actor, and queue on the quayside of Calais. Queue is the material process. Because it's what's happening, right? And in number 3, some were airlifted to hospital by helicopter. Easy, right? So we have some being the goal, some people being the goal, and were airlifted, that's the material process. What is being done to, and to whom? To hospital, circumstantial, by helicopter, that's the agent. So by helicopter, that's the agent, right? Number 4, trippers, people who take the trip. Trippers from Dover had watched in horror as the super ferry failed to slow down on its approach to the French port at 9:45. So we have trippers being behavior. That's the behavioral process. Trippers being the behavior. Trippers from Dover had watched. Watch is the behavioral process. In horror, that's the circumstantial. And then super ferry fail to slow down. We have the actor, superferry, and then fail to slow down, that's the material process because it's what happened, right? And other pieces of information are just circumstantial, like on its approach to the French port at 9:45 and so on. Number 5, cars and lorries. Lorries are trucks. On the lower decks were shunted like to be swept, to be shoved aside, and so on. So they are the goals, right? Cars and lorries are gold. And then were shunted, were swept, that's the material process. So something must swept, something must have swept, something must have shoved the cars. And then we see the agent by the force of the impact. The force is the agent, right, by the force. So in other words, the force shunted the cars and lorries and so on. Number 6, solicitor John Duncan from Essex said, I saw some people and blah, blah, blah. Said is the verbal process, okay? That's easy. And then inside the said, we have I saw some people fly, right? I saw. So that's the mental process, perceiving, with I being the sensor, and so on, okay? And then number 7, the children were terrified. So maybe that's the relational process. Were, right? Relational. And then the children might be the carrier, and so on, okay? So we did this, okay? And now what interpretation we can say about this story, okay, which is important. So what's the process that you see being used most frequently here? What's the most frequently used process? Material process, you may have 8 of them. And then you have 1 mental, maybe you have 1 relational, and you have 2 verbal, and so on, right? So the material is the highest occurrence. So what can we say about this? Is, let's see, the highest instances of the material process tell you that this is a narrative story, right? This is a narrative story, and the writer emphasizes what happened, right? What happened. So that's why you use the material process. And look at the subject of the material processes. Who are they? We have, for example, number 2, dozens were stretchered, and number 3, some were airlifted, right? And cars and lorries. Number 5, car and lorries on the decks were shunted, and so on. So it's a narrative about people having nasty things, having bad things done to them. That's why in the subject position we have the goals most of the time in the material processes, okay? And the verbal process, we see maybe 2 of them, right? The verbal processes are used to report what the witnesses said, right? Are used for reporting. And the writer doesn't give his own description or express his opinion at all, which he could have done, right? But he gives the description through the verbal processes of other people, okay? So that's the technique that he used. So verbal processes are used for this purpose, to give description of the eyewitness accounts or what people see and what people hear and so on in the voice of other people, okay? So he doesn't have to do the description himself and so on. So that's why there's not much of the relational process. He could have said, oh, the situation was like X, Y, and Z, but he didn't. He used the verbal processes to do that, so on, okay? So I hope that you are ready for the midterm on Wednesday.